I have the tremendous privilege of introducing my friend Adrian Tirtanadi, talking about justice, unequal access of justice to the poor. Get ready for Adrian to open your mind to new things and how providing equal access to justice can literally change the world. All right, Adrian, take it from here.
Thank you. So when I was in middle school, I pretty much ate lunch by myself every day. So when Ted said, I want you to be a table host, my first question was, well, what if nobody sits with me? And he said, well, don't worry about that, don't worry about that. I'm going to give you these cards that say, come join me at table 5. So I said, okay. So I gave the card to someone I know, and she said, oh, actually, I'm good, you know. So anyways, thank you, Kathy, for making sure I'm not alone. I'm the founder of Open Door Legal, and we are working to pioneer the country's first system of universal access to civil legal representation. And I thought I'd start with a story because there's so little kind of awareness of civil legal issues that generally I think a little bit of context is useful to understand what I'm talking about. So this is one of our clients named Claudia several years ago, and she had been in this sort of 8-year-long abusive relationship in San Francisco. She was assaulted about twice a week by her husband, and you know, the cops were called several times, but they basically never did anything. She was even hospitalized once because of the abuse. One day, her husband calls the cops and says, oh, my wife has hit me, which actually wasn't even factually true, but this was kind of a method of his control, and it's actually not that uncommon. And so the police come and they arrest her. She goes to jail. She's in jail for 5 nights. She's not criminally charged with anything, but she's given this sort of restraining order that prevents her from going home, getting any money, getting a change of clothes, seeing her children. So she ends up homeless in San Francisco, and she has a trial coming up on whether or not she'll be allowed back in her home. And she goes to 5 agencies around the city and asks for legal help, and they all turn her away. They say, oh, this isn't the kind of issue we handle, or we're already at capacity, you know, something like that. And that's when she finds Open Door Legal. We were very small at the time, just kind of a little office in a Salvation Army in the Bayview neighborhood of San Francisco. And we said immediately, we'll take your case. We did a 3-day trial. We got her back in the home. We got her husband out of the home. We got her child support. We got her a divorce, even though he tried to hide all the community assets. And you know, she remained stably housed. She got a job again, and she even bought a home in the Central Valley recently. Yeah. You know, and this was all done basically for a cost to us of about $3,000 to provide this kind of legal service. So why was it so hard to get help? Well, in California, it's estimated that we only have about 0.79 legal aid attorneys for every 10,000 eligible people. Or that's about less than 800 for the entire state, and about 4 million eligible people. That ratio is actually about average for the country, and it's so bad that every blue-colored country on this map is rated as having a more accessible civil justice system, meaning it's easier to get legal help if you're low income. So what does it look like in other countries? Well, we're essentially the only developed country in the world that doesn't guarantee legal representation in civil matters. So let's say you're facing an eviction and you're in Brazil and you can't afford an attorney. Actually, the public defender would represent you. Or if you are in Finland, you would go to like this sort of community law center and a staff attorney would represent you. Or if you're in the UK, you'd go to a private attorney and they would bill the government for the time it took to represent you. But in the US, we basically say you're on your own, and about 80% of tenants are unrepresented, and controlling for facts, they're about 5 times more likely to lose their home as a result. Another example, this was a client named Ms. Pobre, lived in Bayview. She bought a home with her husband in the 90s. Her husband actually unexpectedly died about 6 months after they bought the home, and she worked as a cleaner. And for 25 years, she spent about 60% of all of her income just paying this mortgage. She did save up about $740,000 in equity, and then kind of fell behind. She thought it was kind of be okay because of all of her equity, but what happened was the bank sort of moved to foreclose on the property, didn't tell her, sold it for $50,000 and 1 penny, which was kind of her outstanding mortgage, sent her a check for 1 penny to represent her lifetime of investment in the property. And then the investment group that bought the property then moved to evict her and her family. So we filed she actually went to her neighbor, and her neighbor referred her to us. We filed a wrongful foreclosure action against this bank, and discovered in the course of the lawsuit that the bank didn't have the legal authority to foreclose in the first place. So we were able to void the foreclosure, get all of her equity back, get about $60,000 in damages, which she used to pay off all of her debt, and wrote a trust so she could pass on the now $800,000 asset to her daughter. So the concept for the nonprofit was to create like the country's first general hospital for legal issues. And if you don't know, a general hospital is sort of like a place-based provider of last resort to make sure everybody can get care. And we've kind of not had that before for legal issues. So we started in one neighborhood, which was kind of Bayview, or District 10 of San Francisco, with the goal of completely saturating the need for legal help within that neighborhood. So here you can see like our little initial storefront. It was sort of in the back of a Salvation Army. Very, very kind of basic. Our first year we had a budget of $35,000, which is enough to pay me and my co-founder kind of minimum wage. And we just began to represent hundreds of individuals and families and all kinds of legal issues. Very, very challenging. I mean, I know for probably about 2.5 years, I didn't sleep through the night once because I was so stressed about funding and about cases. I would wake up covered in sweat 5 times a night from night terrors. Here's just kind of a smattering of some of the major issues we've handled. Everything from estate planning to bankruptcy to consumer fraud to asylum claims and evictions. It's really broad. People ask me, what do you do? And I say, well, we do whatever people come in and need help with, right? We've actually also built a sort of technology product, a case management product that is allowing us to kind of build a network with all the other legal aid providers in the city. And sort of through this network, we hope to create a system of universal access that ensures everybody can get legal help on every issue for every income level from any access point. And we're very excited about that. So this is a map of the area around our first office in Bayview. And every black dot is a family that we've represented. So thanks. Yeah, so it's about 5 to 10 families on every block. So a very interesting thing happened as we are kind of going along. And basically, it's that we saw homelessness declining in sort of the community we served, which is District 10, while it was flat or increasing in the rest of the city. So you can see 2013 is when we started, and you can see in District 10, basically homelessness has been trending down, and in the rest of the city, it's kind of stayed about the same. So we decided to bring in a group of researchers to study this and to determine what how much of our work at ODL caused this decrease. And there were several research methods employed in this upcoming study, I should say, should be released this month. The kind of main research method is what's called quasi-experimental. So we divided all incoming service requests to Open Door Legal into a controller treatment group and used the residential zip code of the service requester as a kind of quasi-experimental element. And what we saw was, and basically the control and treatment group were virtually identical in demographics, race, income, and type of legal issues that they had. And what we saw is the treatment group saw a decrease in their subsequent homelessness rates. This was done by kind of querying the city's homeless database to see who became homeless subsequent, whereas the control group saw a major increase. And if you kind of look at that through the effect size, you'd see that we can estimate that in 45% of the cases where we represented someone at risk of homelessness or currently homeless, we prevented them from continuing to be homeless or allowed them to, prevented them from becoming homeless relative to the counterfactual. And that is a huge effect size, I think, especially if you're familiar with the homelessness literature. We also kind of employed other research methods, including a synthetic control and a difference in difference analysis. And basically what it says is the housing market factors, the demographic factors of District 10, and the work of the city could not explain the decrease in District 10 relative to the rest of the city. So sort of by process of elimination, if you model out the kind of impact we estimated, you would see that basically without Open Door Legal, the homelessness curve in District 10 would have followed the red line, meaning it would have, like the rest of the city, continued to be flat or slightly grow. So from that, we can sort of estimate that Open Door Legal did indeed cause homelessness to decrease by half over this period. We then did a cost estimate, and actually it only costs us about $3,500 per family to represent them. And there's on average about 2 people in each household. And if you kind of factor in targeting, which means how likely is it that the people you help, you're kind of causing them to not become homeless, it seems, based off our literature review, that this is by far the most kind of cost-effective way to reduce homelessness. Comparing it to a recent RCT in Santa Clara regarding financial assistance, it's about 7 times more cost-effective. So what are the legal issues that people who are either homeless or at risk of homelessness have? Well, the main one that's kind of talked about is evictions, and that's very obvious. But formal evictions itself is only about 1/4 of all the legal issues that participants had in the study. Other housing issues is about 20%. So those include lockout, security deposit issues, habitability issues, discrimination, housing discrimination, and other kinds of housing issues like that. Family law is 14%, and that's mostly domestic violence issues, torts, employment, consumer, immigration, elder, public benefits. They're all included in, and so as part of the study, we decided to kind of divide all these issues into 3 general mechanisms for how legal services prevents people from becoming homeless. So one is property rights. Basically, if you're low income in the US, you do not have enforceable property rights. So one example is wrongful foreclosure. And a good case study for that is Ms. Pobray's case, which I mentioned earlier. Another good one is probate fraud. And I've had many clients where they were set to inherit a home, but the will was fraudulently changed at the last minute, and then the new owners moved to evict them from the home. Torts. I've had many clients where the landlords have come into their unit, taken all their property and thrown it away. That's a tort. or where landlords have installed, let's say, cameras in the bathrooms of their tenants. That's also a tort. So torts are kind of like civil harms outside of contracts. Consumer fraud, very obvious. Identity theft, for example, is a big issue. You know, I've had caretakers take all the money for the elders that they are supposed to be taking care of. I've seen, you know, like let's say these fraudulent tax clinics, you know, put up shop, take people's money and never file taxes, for example. Bank liens, you know, banks will kind of on a semi-random basis seize the money in people's bank accounts. And if all of your money has been seized, how are you going to afford a lawyer to get it back, right? Here's a quote from one of the ethnographic kind of studies from one of the clients in this study. He said, quote, "Open Door Legal made all the difference. There's absolutely no question that we would have ended up homeless on the streets without their help." And this was for a case of probate fraud. Another kind of mechanism is what I would call the enforcement of contract rights. So when you execute a lease, you're kind of executing a contract, and there's sort of implied covenants with that, including that the landlord has to provide a habitable home and that they have to give you this sort of quiet enjoyment. So, you know, I've had clients where raw sewage has flooded their home and the landlord refused to fix it or pay for any of the property damage or put them in alternative accommodation. I've had landlords that have screamed death threats through the walls to their tenants, which violates quiet enjoyment. I've had landlords who claim that their tenants are not actually tenants, that they're squatters, despite, you know, we spent 7 months litigating against a landlord who claimed her tenants were squatters, despite the fact that, you know, they had been paying rent, the utilities were in their name, and, you know, she just tried to get them out. And I've had many landlords who also just, because of ledger issues, state that the tenant owes money when they don't owe money, where they've paid their rent, and the landlord just messed it up. We've also had many clients suffer wage theft. Actually, it's estimated that if you add up all wage theft in the US combined, it's about 3 times more than all property crime combined. I had a client who got a job, was fired, wasn't paid her last paycheck, and then got a new job and wasn't paid wages for that one either. So it's very hard to maintain your housing if you're not getting paid by your employers. And then collection defense, you know, like there's huge numbers of companies that basically have built their entire business model on the fact that people can't get legal help. Because in California, it's almost impossible to collect on third-party debt. So what companies do, what debt buyer companies do, is they'll mass sue people and convert kind of a claim debt into a judgment because people aren't able to get legal help and so default on the lawsuit. And then once you have a judgment, you can collect on that for up to 10 years, right? Whereas a contract claim, you have 4 years to collect on. So you can get the judgment, then you can garnish their wages, you can seize their bank assets for up to 10 years later, and you didn't even need to have the debt in the first place. So here's another client. This client was repeatedly locked out by their landlord, but we were able to get her back in, get all of her stuff, and she remains housed there to this day. Despite, again, paying rent every month. And the last kind of mechanism is around public services and violence prevention. One study found that legal aid was the only intervention actually associated with the reduction in domestic violence in a county. And, you know, basically, like Claudia's story earlier, when you get restraining orders, you're kind of forcing the police to act to restrain these particular people and prevent violence, especially against women. But there's other ways that you kind of force the government to act. So in one client, for naturalization certificates, for example, we had one client who was a foreign adoptee, and you know, he was adopted from Korea, brought to the US. His parents died and lost the naturalization certificate. So he and his son ended up homeless, but they couldn't get into sort of subsidized housing because the landlord's like, well, you have to prove your citizenship to get this kind of public benefit. So it actually he spent 3 years trying to get his naturalization certificate. Only with our help and congressional intervention were we able to get it. And then last example, sort of unemployment insurance. We recently had a client who had a job, borrowed a spray bottle to disinfect his car because he used it for a work trip, got fired for that, and then got on unemployment insurance, but his employer then said he was fired for cause. So not only did he get kicked off unemployment insurance, but they charged him $15,000 for the benefits they had already given him. So he ended up homeless, and we were able to get not only that debt canceled, but get him an additional $15K on top of that in benefits that he was due. So overall, for the participants in the study, in addition to preventing homelessness 45% of the time, the average participant also had about $27,000 in canceled debt, about $1,700 in cash awards, and other kind of non-cash outcomes like orders of protection. Our big vision is to basically finish scaling this citywide, make San Francisco the first city in the country with universal access to legal representation. I think we need to increase our budget about $4 million a year to do that. And through that, decrease homelessness 20–40% across the city. Actually, thanks. Actually, between 2019 and 2022, SF was the only urban county in California to see a decline in homelessness, and the only part of San Francisco to see a decline was District 10.
Woo! 47% decline or 49%?
I think it's about 49%.
49% decline in homelessness over a period where the rest of the state and the nation, pretty much every other comparable area, is increasing. It's incredible. And I've been such a champion of Adrian because this isn't in the national dialogue. It seems like we're yelling at each other, we're fighting, but the yelling and the fighting are addressing valid issues, but the yelling and the fighting are compounding them. And Adrian's bringing incredible solutions.